Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello there, and welcome all you porcupines, to episode 30 of the Porcupine Report. As always, I'm your host, your renegade statesman, executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Glad to be with you this evening for episode 30. 30 episodes so far. We've been doing this for 30 consecutive weeks now. We're bringing you a new episode every single Wednesday night at 7 o'clock p.m. So thank you to all who've been sharing the show. I keep getting good feedback. You know, I was just at a welcome wagon here in New Hampshire just this past week. Welcome wagons are what we do when a new mover is arriving. They're moving into their new house, and we get a whole bunch of great Free Staters to show up, welcome them, and help them unpack their U-Haul and get all their furniture and boxes and everything else into their new home. Anyway, we were talking afterwards, enjoying some pizza and some nice local beers. And turns out this guy, Steven, who we helped move in, watches the show, the Porcupine Report. So it's always great to hear when people are watching and giving feedback. So Steven, welcome to your new home. It was an honor to be able to help you move in. And to all who might not be living in New Hampshire yet, if you've thought about it, check out fsp.org and learn about all the resources that exist to help you make the move or at least come for a visit. And one great opportunity to visit New Hampshire and to come to a great event is coming up in just a few weeks on September 1st. It is the Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference taking place in Durham, New Hampshire. And it's and you can register and you can get a ticket at is blockchainnh.com, blockchainnh.com. I'm going to be speaking there, and there's going to be a lot of great speakers. In fact, as I say that, I realize I owe them a topic and a title for my remarks, and I haven't given them to that yet. So if they're watching, sorry, I will get that to you pretty quickly. Anyway, but you don't miss out. That'll be September 1st, and I hope to see you there. Great opportunity if you're already living in New Hampshire to come and have great conversations about cryptocurrency and the future of kind of innovative monetary technologies with great thinkers and thought leaders, because, of course, New Hampshire is the cradle of crypto. In New Hampshire, that's where it was rocked in the cradle, and cryptocurrency grew up to be the big and strong powerhouse that it is today, especially cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. So come on out September 1st, get your tickets, blockchainnh.com. All right. Now, our guest for today is someone who I've known for as long as I've been a libertarian. And I can say that because this individual played a pretty significant role. He didn't necessarily know he was doing it at the time, but he played a pretty significant role in me converting from being, I'm a little ashamed to say it, a neoconservative back in the day, back in the George W. Bush era, when I was still drinking the Fox News Kool-Aid. Our next guest, he was on the radio. He was doing talk radio. He was releasing YouTube videos, kind of engaging conservative audiences and really kind of making the connection as to why, if you believe in conservative principles, if you follow that all the way through and you apply it consistently, you actually are probably a libertarian, or at least some variation of on a libertarian. And that's a big part of how I came to the Ron Paul movement, and the rest is history. His name is Jack Hunter, and he's joining us today. Jack, welcome to the Porcupine Report.
Always great to be with you, Eric.
Well, it's my pleasure, Jack. And I know, South Carolina is, I know, near and dear to your heart. It's part of your, where you're raised and grew up. And I know it's where your heart is. But I also appreciate that you took the time this year. You've come up to visit New Hampshire twice now, this year for New Hampshire Liberty Forum and also for the Porcupine Freedom Festival, where you spoke at the main pavilion at PorcFest this year. Before I guess we get to anything else, like how was your experience? What did you make of PorcFest?
I'm ashamed to say it was my first PorcFest, and I'm happy to say it was absolutely wonderful. And I hate that I missed out on all the other ones. It was such a great experience, not just being around like-minded people, which can be fun. It's good to be around not like-minded people often too. But we were all a happy band of libertarians there in New Hampshire. The scenery was beautiful. People probably can't tell from my accent. I actually lived in Woburn, Massachusetts, outside of Boston in the 90s for about 3 years. So it's not like I'd never experienced New Hampshire, but it'd been a minute. And I absolutely loved it. It was great to see you and so many familiar faces and people I'd never met at the same time. I can't wait to do it again next year.
All right. Well, we hope next year we'll get you up there for a little bit longer. I know you were in for maybe a day or two, and you had to dash, but now you've got a taste of it. So we'll get you back for the full course meal next year.
Absolutely.
And I know, I guess maybe you should say shout out while I'm thinking about it to the great one, Dr. Ron Paul. His birthday was yesterday, so happy birthday to Ron Paul. Any thoughts from you on the good doctor on the occasion of his birthday week?
It's nothing I haven't said before, but his 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns revolutionized American politics in a way that some understand because they were there and it still affected them, and some might overlook, but it has affected our politics. The only Republican presidential candidate that won in those cycles was Ron Paul. John McCain got nominated. He did not become president. Mitt Romney got nominated. He did not become president. You and I both just attended the Young Americans for Liberty's 15th anniversary conference with a gazillion people there, as there is every year, and it's invite only. That's the cream of the crop. So there were so many people that applied that didn't get there. Is there a Young Americans for John McCain group? Is there a Young Americans for Mitt Romney group? Because Young Americans for Liberty started as students for Ron Paul. Well, they're there. They're making waves. We heard from elected politicians on that stage who were involved with Young Americans for Liberty or backed by Young Americans for Liberty. The son of Ron Paul is a prominent U.S. senator. There are other libertarian leaning. Point being, before Ron Paul, there was this one dude named Ron Paul in Congress that most people had never heard of, and he did what he could. When he ran for president and the phenomenon and the movement happened, you've got a whole movement and legacy that continues to this day in strength thanks to his efforts. So, yeah, happy birthday to Ron Paul, and thank you for everything you did for us and the country.
I think he was a great example of what leading by example looks like.
Yeah.
He's not someone who leads with a bullhorn, barking orders, telling people what to do, how to live their lives. He's not. He's never so arrogant to think that he can tell you how to live your life or what you should do. I know even after he retired from Congress and people in the liberty movement were asking him for advice and guidance on like what to do next, how to advance liberty. And he would just say, I don't know. You got to figure it out for yourself. There's a job out there for you, but you got to find it. And I think that in some respects, I think back to that moment about how, if he had come out and said, all right, this is going to be the way, everyone's got to run for the state legislature. Obviously, I think that run for the state legislature is a good thing. That's what I did, but it's not the only way. And if you had to try to centrally plan this liberty movement and, maybe you wouldn't have had the rise of cryptocurrencies or the homeschool networks or all these diverse ways that people have found their own niches, their own passions, to apply their own skill sets to advance the cause of liberty.
I think he inherently and implicitly understands. We preach about individual liberty, the organic nature of what that might produce. You can't predict it. You can't plan. That's what central planners want to do. We're the government. We're going to do this. It's the opposite sort of mindset. A personal anecdote about how that was impressed on me, how much Ron Paul values individual liberty and not telling others what to do. I did a book project, 14 years ago now, I guess, with his son, Senator Rand Paul. Before he was a senator, he was running for the U.S. Senate. And, I'm a Ron Paul fanatic, right? But also doing this thing with his son. And we're riding around in the campaign van and I'm talking to him and interviewing him for this project we're working on. And in my Ron Paul brain, I'm thinking like, well, where does this exactly line up with his dad and blah, blah, blah. And it generally did. But like, that's at the forefront of my mind. And I said something to Rand, something about that and his dad. And he just kind of looked at me like, what? Like, the point is, he and his dad are not on the phone crisscrossing. There's his dad and there's his son. And he is very much his father's son as far as being a libertarian. But they don't like cross-reference everything it's not like that. There's two people involved. They happen to be related. But does that make sense what I'm saying? That's how much they value individual liberty. They're their own people.
Yeah.
And that was shown to me in a big way. I mean, they pretty much believe the same thing, but still.
Well, right. Similar things, the same core principles, but also different strategies, right?
Yeah, and that's fine. They both respect it and love each other, but
right.
Like it's the same goals, the same liberty goal. But it just impressed on me in a big way early on. Like when Ron Paul talks about individual liberty, that is not rhetoric. That applies to his son. That applies to his family. It applies to you he's talking to. It applies to everybody. Do it your own way. Be your own man or woman.
Yeah. I know Rand, I think, was often criticized, and I think often very unfairly for not being exactly like his father, being a little bit more, maybe more tactical in how he operates the U.S. Senate and his voting record, he is pristine, but like but certainly, Ron, it always, the value of Ron Paul was he kind of established like the North Star, right? You can always measure yourself against true North by Ron Paul's example for 30 years. And we need that. But we also need people who will go into the system and be more tactical and strategic and try to be more operators of the system rather than standing apart from it and being kind of unblemished by it. I think both are needed, and one is not necessarily better than the other. In fact, I think that sometimes people get so caught up in, right, that all libertarians need to do X or need to do Y, or even like in presidential races, all libertarians need to vote for Donald Trump or vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or vote for Chase Oliver or vote for whoever it is. I kind of think that there's value in kind of libertarians kind of getting into all of these different camps and be and having an influence in all of these kind of different tribal institutions. Certainly that's what the neoconservatives have been very successful at doing for so long, is infiltrating these institutions, while we've kind of stood on the sidelines, not engaging in maintaining purity tests. I think that the more kind of the diversity of tactics among libertarians is valuable.
Neoconservatives have been the masters of manipulating current reality towards their ends. And I respect them for that and hate pretty much everything else about them. As far as what we're talking about, look, I used to have these debates mostly with Jeffrey Tucker early in the liberty movement, public debates about should we vote and be involved in politics, or should it just be education? That was the debate. People talk about it all the time. And of course, I was the political guy. I came into this movement through politics first. I became a libertarian after the fact of Ron Paul running. But the point I would always make is that in 2013, when they were trying to confirm John Brennan to be the head of the FBI, Rand Paul stood on the Senate floor and held a filibuster that made national headlines. And the issue was the droning of American citizens. We had done that during the Obama administration. A 16-year-old American citizen was killed by a U.S. drone, no due process, anything. But you can't do that. So Rand Paul held this filibuster, made national headlines. He was on the Rush Limbaugh show. He was on all these national programs. And Dave Weigel of the Washington Post noted that public opinion on whether or not the federal government can just kill an American citizen without any trial or due process swung 50% in the direction of Rand Paul. Now, this was a political move. He was holding a filibuster. He is a U.S. senator. It was a political move. How many Americans were even thinking about the issue of whether it's okay to drone an American citizen or not before this filibuster? Probably not many. So not only were they now thinking about this in a big way, their opinion was in the direction of Rand Paul and not John Brennan and the Obama administration and the political establishment at the time. That was a political action, and it was the biggest educational action you could possibly imagine at the time or any time. So they're not mutually exclusive, is my point.
And certainly beyond all of that, Rand Paul's opposition to Brennan in that role seems somewhat prophetic looking,
Right.
looking back at,
There's also that. Correct.
well, awesome. Well, so Jack, obviously I enjoy talking with you anytime we get a chance to talk. I think that you are, I think, are one of the most articulate voices that I see out there who can, I think, understands the nature of kind of the neoconservative movement in terms of fighting against that for all these years. And I think that you have a great perspective as far as kind of communicating liberty to conservative audiences. And I really appreciate your remarks at PorcFest. We're going to get that up sometime. We're actually, by the way, for everyone who's been asking about where's the video from PorcFest, we have just received the hard drive of all the video from our video production team there at PorcFest, and we are getting started with the process of getting it all edited and up. So you'll expect to see that in the next, certainly before the end of the year, certainly, but probably sooner than that. But anyway, just for those who've been asking. So that includes Jack Hunter's great remarks, which I'll tell you, Jack, I think there were a lot of people at PorcFest who, after you spoke, I know some people came up to me and said, I don't know who this Jack Hunter guy is, but I'm surprised I'd never heard of him. Your remarks were very well received. But I invited you on today in particular because I saw a video that you just put out about, boy, I always get nervous now. How do you say her name? Everyone keeps arguing about it. I know your friend Nancy Mace was getting
Kamala. I've said Kamala Harris for her entire career, but we learned this week it's Kamala. I'm not trying to disrespect the woman. If I'm going to do that, it's going to be on policy, not her name. Kamala Harris, I think.
Yeah, Kamala. Yeah. Where I don't know if people are getting in trouble for calling her Kamala. Is it like an emphasis on
Kamala Harris? And as a pro wrestling fan, I grew up watching Kamala the Ugandan Giant. So like, there's two Kamalas in my life, but you say Kamala Harris. Yeah, that's, you got to think about it.
It's amazing. She's been vice president for like four years now, and we're still having these.
Hey, anything not to talk about any policy or ideas. Let's argue about her name. That's what
yeah. And then we're playing the game. Well, so you had a pretty good video I thought you put out, kind of outlining how for so many people who are kind of opposing Trump because they don't like populism, and Trump is a populist, while Kamala Harris seems to be embracing a certain kind of populism in her messaging anyway. So I think it really gets to the fundamental question that I think oftentimes bears kind of being sorted out as like, what is populism anyway? And is populism necessarily in competition with liberty? Can it be used to further liberty? How should we view populism, particularly as it's played such a prominent role in American politics the last decade?
Populism, in the most bare bones, simple definition, is the little guy against the big guy. That's the beginning of it. We have friends, we have foes who've been arguing since 2016 that the problem is populism, that Donald Trump represents that. He alone, often in these cases, we have these conversations with our friends and foes, and that's what must be opposed. That is a severe misreading of what's going on. I like things about Donald Trump. I really don't like certain things about Donald Trump, but populism is not the problem. You and I began this conversation talking about how wonderful Ron Paul is and wishing him a happy birthday. His 2008 and 2012 campaigns that created the Ron Paul phenomenon were populist movements. They were called that at the time. They should be recognized as such now. We were the people without the institutional power, without the leverage, without the political power, who were challenging the political establishment. And at the time, it was the post-George W. Bush Republican Party at the time and the Democratic Party and all the big government pro-war ideas that go along with that. We were populist. We are populist to the degree we still believe in that. I'm going to expand the definition of populism in real-world terms further. The Bernie Sanders movement, a socialist, we don't agree with him. Populist movement. The Democratic Party did to him in 2016, Hillary Clinton, because he represented the little guy, even though they were socialists challenging Hillary Clinton and her machine. It was populist. The Jesse Jackson movement, we saw him if you watched the Democratic National Convention the other night, whenever this airs, was a populist movement in 1988. The Democratic Party establishment did not want him. The Tea Party movement from 2009 and 2010, a right-leaning, limited government, fiscal responsibility movement, was populist. Mitch McConnell was not at the Tea Party. He's going, oh, this is great. I love the Tea. No, he was the establishment. We were the Tea Party. We were against that. The Occupy Wall Street movement on the left was a populist movement. Right now, I don't know about you, Eric, or any of the people watching and listening, but I have friends who used to be Ron Paulers who like went crazy in the Trump direction and they're all about that, whatever. And I also have some who I still respect and love that like voted for Joe Biden and are voting for the Democrat. Like that's where they think they need to do. And they will tell you immediately the populism is a problem. It's bad. This populist stuff has to end. Well, lo and behold, Kamala Harris is branding herself as a populist. She's called for price controls and other socialist, or as Donald Trump would say, communist economic policies. But they represent a certain type of left-wing progressive populist tradition in the United States. And the reason she's doing that is because she knows the populist branding is attractive. She picked Tim Walz over some other candidates as her VP because he has a folksy populist manner. She's trying to counteract that one thing that Trump has that is attractive, which is populism. Now, the alternative to populism, and Eric, you explained this to me, the alternative to that, if we want to change things, we're the little guy fighting the powers that be. If we can't use populism, if we can't organically do what I just said, little guy fighting the big guy, are we just expect to like go to the people in charge and be like, hey, here's our white papers from our think tank. We think you should do this instead of the stuff you've been doing. And they're going to be like, you know what? That's a good point. We're going to stop doing the stuff we've been doing and read these papers you came up with your think tank. Is that the only alternative to populism? Because I don't see how you change things without challenging from the bottom up.
Yeah, an anti-populist strategy for restoring the Constitution is it
what?
seems akin to me like what I see some people do, where I think they're wasting their time, their money, their resources, is they'll like go to the legislators and they'll hand out pocket constitutions to the legislators as like as if like, oh, if you just read this thing,
right,
if you are an oath to uphold, then you will certainly see that all these things you voted for, all the graft, all the corruption, all these programs that aren't authorized, like you'll read it, you'll understand, and you'll be changed, and you'll be a better legislator.
No,
right?
You got to scare them.
Right, exactly.
You got to make them. So Joe Biden agreed to let Julian Assange say he was guilty and is a felon, but now he's free. He has a better life now, right?
Yeah.
Do you think one day Joe Biden woke up and was like, man, this guy was just a journalist and he was doing a good thing, and how dare we persecute him? Do you think that's why that happened? Did he had a conscience, Joe Biden, all of a sudden? Or did he hear from his advisors that Donald Trump might possibly beat him to the punch on this, and he didn't want to look bad with his left flank, so he did it first? It's the second one. You make them do it. That's why that happened. Now, what can Trump do now? He's not a felon. I'll give him a full pardon. Will he do that? I don't know. But the point is, with populism, that's how these things work. You force their hands. Murray Rothbard used to say this. Ron Paul said this. It's not about making every member of Congress a libertarian. It's about making them do the right thing through incentives. That's what populism is, whether that's fear or, holy hell, I'm going to lose this election or whatever it is. That's what you do. And that's different than, as you said, hey, here's a pocket constitution. Nothing's going to happen to you if you don't read this, but if you do, we'll be better. That's the alternative to populism in my mind, unless somebody can present a better alternative, and that's foolish.
Yeah, it is. I haven't been inside the apparatus in Washington, D.C., but I've been inside my own state legislature, and I mean, I can tell everyone that the fear at the back of every single person's mind who holds elected office is reelection and the prospect of not winning reelection. And the most effective thing that we have available to make them afraid of kind of their reelection is large numbers of angry voters mobilized on a particular issue, whether that's like petitions or emails or calls, like letting them know like, hey, you better vote for constitutional carry or cannabis legalization or whatever it might be. You better vote for this, or else we will mobilize against you in your reelection. And certainly, people who are in vulnerable districts, that's enough to make them pay attention. Whereas if you just go and try to educate them on the issue, I mean, maybe they are even like in good faith, like, not all politicians are total scumbags, right? And most of them, I will actually say, most politicians, from my experience, are in fact nice people. That's how they get elected. They are professional, nice people. And some of them are even genuinely nice people and not just faking it. But they don't necessarily have the same set of principles that you or I have. They're not always necessarily deep thinkers about the Constitution or the nature of human liberty. They've got it's the old saying, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. They've got a hammer, and it's the government, and there's all these problems, right? And they're just trying to fix problems with the one hammer one tool they have, which is government, and it leads to many more problems. But if you're just kind of bringing an issue to them or trying to make them aware of an issue, there's so many things that are begging for their attention. And it's not until you bring something that actually could affect it's like public choice theory, right? Until you bring something that can actually like affect kind of them in a personal nature and their reelections, then you're not going to have their attention. But of course, for the establishment, they have many other tools, right? They've got millions of dollars they can throw around. They've literally got access to a money printing machine, right? They've got all of these kind of institutional levers of power to try to control the politicians. What we have is the voting system and is the ability to mobilize kind of the grassroots people against them. And so, yeah, we've got to use that. And I will say there are many things to criticize about Donald Trump, but his populism is probably one of the best features about him. Because look, people can say like all the time, oh, well, Donald Trump said, take the guns first and due process later, right? Well, he didn't end up doing that. Why didn't he end up doing that? Because the backlash against him from the populace, right, his populist base is, what are you saying? What are you doing? Right. And he responds to that because he knows the populism is his power base. And so that also means that there's a direct accountability between him and the populist base that put him there. And the danger, of course, is people, selling their soul to a politician, to, supporting Donald Trump to such a degree that whatever he does is great and we can't criticize him. It's like, no, we have to be ready to criticize him, to hold him accountable, and to keep him doing the things we want him to do. And everyone in his base should recognize that's the power they have.
Yeah. And look, it's important to what you just said, like, pure devotion to a political figure just because no matter what they say or what they do is not healthy. Yeah. That's not good. But to want good things from somebody that is controversial is a different thing. Let's do left and right versions of this. So right now, the U.S. is funding Israel's military mission in Gaza. There are a lot of people, including me, I'm on the right, but there are a lot of people, especially on the left, that does not like what the U.S. is funding in Gaza as far as the misery and death and whatnot. So you see protests. Now, I find a lot of those protesters atrocious. Some I think are genuine anti-Semites. And when they are in favor of Hamas, there's no excuse for that. Those are disgusting people. But there is a sizable portion, I would say majority, that are not anti-Semites or pro-Hamas that don't like what's happening there with the innocent civilian deaths. That is populism. Even the progressive left on the DNC, yeah, Bernie Sanders and AOC called for a ceasefire in Gaza on the stage, but they're still supporting administrations that are not doing that. Mm-hmm. So do you keep pressuring Bernie and AOC from a populist stance as a Democratic voter? I say yes. What you just said about Donald Trump and some of his terrible anti-Second Amendment positions, he heard about that quickly from his populist right, his base, his supporters, and shut up about it and didn't do what we were worried he might do. That's good. Populism is good. You know what? It's even democratic. These people who act like populism is such a bad thing, that say we need to be against populism in the name of protecting democracy. What's more democratic than letting your voice be heard and it affecting change?
So I guess that leads to another question then. If populism is democratic, but the people who often talk about protecting democracy tend to be among the most opposed to populism, then what do they mean by democracy?
What they mean by democracy is the same a-holes are in charge and they get control of everything. You don't have a say. I mean, we have a party called the Democratic Party that didn't have a primary for their sitting president, and I'm not throwing stones at that. That is not unprecedented. Sitting presidents do that. But then they decide he's too old and messed up in the head to run for president, and they just let the vice president be the nominee with no primary. They're like, this is democracy. We're the Democratic Party. There was no democracy in any of those changes. The only democracy is going to happen in the general election in November. But on the right, the Republican establishment wants, look, the people that have been in charge that think the archetype for being a Republican is Bush, Cheney are still there. They hate that this Trump thing's happened. They hated Ron Paul. They certainly hate his son and anything associated with all. Not that they're the same, but they represent a challenge to them, the neoconservative establishment, many of which are just in the Democratic Party now. But to answer your question, Eric, what do they consider democracy? They get to do exactly what they want, whether it's the deep state or just the system as it is. And how dare any of these peasants out there challenge the way we do things? If we want to bomb Iran and, enrich Boeing and Raytheon and Halliburton, like we've always done, that's our foreign policy. How dare you oppose that?
Yeah.
If we want to spend all this money on bailouts or COVID relief and, our dollars devalue, inflation goes up and we're like, oh, Putin's doing it. How dare you challenge our reasoning on that? I could do this all day, but they want their BS establishment nonsense to stand unchallenged, Republicans and Democrats.
And I sometimes think how revealing it is what they mean by democracy when we look at what they mean by it overseas, right? It seems like we'll go into a country to spread democracy, and the people are allowed to elect anyone they want, so long as it's someone someone that they approve of, right? And if they elect someone who is not someone the Washington D.C. regime approves of, then we need to do regime change all over again to spread democracy better this time.
Yeah,
right.
The last thing they want is actual democracy.
Right. And it seems when you see our foreign policy through that lens, it's very easy to start to look back at our country and realize these same lack of principles seem to apply here for how they look at democracy. Democracy more and more seems to be like, at least on the federal level, it's like, you give a kid a toy steering wheel when you're in the car with him and say, hey, look, you're driving the car, but the steering wheel's not attached to anything. It doesn't do anything. It's there to placate the child and grant the illusion that they're participating in this while the grown-ups make the real decisions. And the grown-ups in Washington, D.C., who are insulated from democratic accountability because they're the heads of these intelligence agencies or federal departments or what have you, anytime you try to reform something there, like Donald Trump has talked about, then they attack him and they say, he's attacking our democratic institutions. The institutions that are the most insulated from democracy are our heralded democratic institutions. So, it's the perversion of language, and it's sad how many folks are still figuring this out, I suppose, or are still kind of caught up in this, and how quickly they receive the new programming kind of week to week and are ready to cheer on the next thing and the next thing.
I think you give people too much credit. I don't, this sounds terrible. People always ask me why I'm so optimistic. It's because I don't expect much from my fellow human beings. I love them. I love my family and my friends and, fellow travelers, but people are messed up. Like, most people believe what they believe because of who they hate. If I tell, we're, the midst of this election right now, if I have a lot of left-leaning friends. I was a musician before I got into this politics stuff. That's not really a hotbed of conservatism or libertarianism. But a lot of my... As
a former theater kid, I know the feeling.
Right. So I have friends that I've known, for 25, 30 years that very much not aligned with me politically. And if I went up to them right now and aggravated the hell out of them by going, hey, when Kamala Harris was Attorney General, she quadrupled the number of nonviolent black men put in prison. Hey, there was this dude on death row in California, and there was evidence that could exonerate him from being killed, but it was her case, and she went out of her way to make sure that evidence didn't see the light of day because it would embarrass her. Are they going to be like, man, I need to rethink this woman? No, they hate Donald Trump way too much. They're going to be like, shut up. you're for Trump. I'm like, actually, no, I've never voted for Trump. But like, oh, that's how people think, Eric.
I mean, I will say to be fair, as I have kind of made the decision that I will personally be voting for Donald Trump this go round. It's not necessarily because
I probably am too, but it will be the first time. But
yeah. But it's not necessarily because he's great and wonderful. I mean, I think he's the best that's come along in a long time, but that's because the bar's been set so low. But it is kind of more a fear of kind of return to this, this kind of. There's a fear of kind of this imperial structure that's been put in place that's trying desperately to cling to power, and Donald Trump seems to be the biggest monkey wrench to throw in their gears that has come along in a bit.
I understand that. I think we're going sort of on the other side of the woke stuff that I was so worried about in like 2019 and 2020, as far as the illiberalism that was creeping, and just like the left not even caring about free speech, the ACLU not defending free speech, like that. I think we're on the other side of that. Not that it's not still there, but like, I think a combination like Joe Rogan, Dave Chappelle, these people that have withstood it, that they tried to cancel, has shown that those people are less powerless than they were. I flirted with thinking about voting for Donald Trump during that era for those reasons. I'm probably voting for him. I like RFK too, but I'm probably voting for him for this reason. After October 7th, when Hamas terrorized Israel and killed all those innocent people in Israel and took them hostage, and Israel rightly retaliated, then it got worse and worse and went far beyond the scope of going after Hamas, and so many innocent civilians were dying and our taxpayer dollars were funding it. Biden was like, we stand with Israel, we'll fund whatever they want. I'm like, well, that's not really a good answer. Maybe listen to some progressives in your party. But Donald Trump, the first thing he said when he was asked about it, we have to stop the killing. People need to stop dying. That was the most humane and normal thing you should say. Not Israel's completely wrong or Palestine's completely right or vice versa. Just the killing needs to stop. Now, he said other things too, finish the job. And, he's a politician. He's good at speaking outside both sides of his mouth. But, Ron Paul said we need to talk to our enemies instead of war. Churchill said that. Jaw is better than war. Reagan was criticized by the neoconservatives of his time for meeting Mikhail Gorbachev and having diplomatic relations with Russia. They were mad. Newt Gingrich basically said it was Munich all over again. Well, Donald Trump, for all his flaws, fancies himself as a deal maker. He's a negotiator. When he met and shook hands with North Korea's dictator president, the left lost their ever-loving minds. I stood up and applauded. Not because that dictator's good. That's what you do as a head of state if you want to avoid war and death. So do you and he said he's going to meet with Putin. He's going to meet with Netanyahu and everybody. That's what you do.
It was worse than that, as I remember, because, of course, I was running for U.S. Senate when this happened. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it's when he was over there in negotiations, sitting down with Kim Jong-un. That is the time that the Democrats in the House filed impeachment orders against him, right? To totally just try to scuttle the possibility of peace there, right? And there are other mistakes that Donald Trump made in that, certainly having John Bolton on his team who screwed that up royally. But it's just, man, I mean, but I'll say that example with North Korea, I'm so glad you bring it up, because that is the moment that made me realize that maybe there was something I couldn't just take at face value about Donald Trump, that I was very concerned when he was first on Twitter calling Kim Jong-un little rocket man. And I'm just thinking he is escalating to something very dangerous here. Nukes could start flying. What is he doing? And then to see that suddenly turn towards a deal-making path, a peacemaking path, made me, I guess, just notice and appreciate something that it seemed like the play was to escalate, to de-escalate, to, that there was with North Korea, there had been a long-term status quo that was unacceptable all around, but we'd also kind of gotten comfortable in it. Everyone had kind of gotten comfortable in this kind of this bad, just somewhat bad situation. And Donald Trump just comes and just turns over the whole table. And now
Yeah.
you can't have the status quo anymore, right? So now we got to figure out a new arrangement and maybe move towards peace. And so I hope that when it comes to Israel, I will say I do get concerned because I sat there as a delegate at the Republican National Convention representing the state of Maine, and I was uncomfortable with just how much how Israeli-centric parts of this convention were, and like I love the Jewish people.
Sure.
I love, but I am uncomfortable with the state of the Israeli state right now in terms of how they are treating the Palestinians and how they have been treating the Palestinians for the last half century. I'm uncomfortable with that, and I don't, as an American, want to be involved in that. So I'm concerned with how much of an emphasis there is on standing with Israel no matter what. But I also hope, and maybe it's playing Russian roulette a little bit. You never quite know what you're going to get with Donald Trump. That's part of what makes him, I guess that's part of his greatness, but also just part of what always kind of has you really kind of wondering what exactly you're getting. Is I hope that if and when Trump gets in there, it's not, okay, we're following through on my promise to what's her name, Adelson,
Oh yeah.
Anyway, and we're gonna kind of annex the West Bank and just like do an ethnic cleansing of this whole region. I hope that's not what we're getting. I hope it is, okay, Donald Trump is the person to make a deal for lasting peace, but I don't know.
Well, two things there. I'm asking you, Eric Brakey, can you stand with America and oppose its government?
Absolutely.
Can you stand with Israel and oppose its government?
Absolutely.
Okay. A lot of conservatives have a problem with that second part. They think that there's some sort of divine thing about the Likud party that was elected whenever they were elected, and they're infallible and we can't question anything they do. That is not how they treat their own government. I wish they could see things in those terms, but that's bizarre. That is absolutely bizarre. As far as what Trump's going to do, his gut, what he wants to do is to make deals with people. So he doesn't give a damn what the Democrats say about him at this point. He says, I'm going to go sit down with Putin. And he's asked by like Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes, do you admire Putin? Do you like Putin? Do you call him a war criminal? And he says, instead of, oh, well, I've got to answer Leslie Stahl, he goes, well, if I called him a war criminal, that would be harder to make a deal with him, wouldn't it? And he's correct. That's what a statesman would say. An idiot like Leslie Stahl at 60 Minutes would do the other thing. When Barack Obama went and met with Putin during his administration, Republicans were like, oh, he's in the pocket of Russia. Oh, he's with Putin. This is bad. I'm like, y'all are morons. This is hats off. Salute, Obama. You talk to your enemies. That's what Ron Paul said. That's what Reagan did. Y'all like Reagan, right? And I was, they were still in that neocon mindset, but their own guy, Trump, does it now. Some of the same voters are like, hell with y'all, Trump's great. I love Trump. He should talk to Putin. I have a low bar for human beings. That's where they are. It's about who they hate.
I'm glad you bring up kind of Reagan, because this is something I think I've learned from you over the years. Of course, I was born in '88, so Reagan was on his way out when I was coming into the world. I don't have much recollection of the Reagan. I have no recollection of the Reagan years other than what I learned after the fact. And of course, what I learned after the fact, what I was told about the Reagan years growing up, was very much I've learned over time was not actually what the Reagan years were like. It was a cultivated narrative cultivated by certain political factions that wanted to co-opt the Reagan legacy and define it to be a particular thing to serve their interests. And of course, I'm speaking about the neoconservatives.
Yeah, they did a good job.
Who co-opted his legacy on foreign policy, understanding that he was becoming and had become a cult-like figure within the Republican Party. And so then for the next 20 years, anytime anyone questioned any war ever, they could say, you are going against what Ronald Reagan stood for. But of course, as you pointed out many times, Ronald Reagan actually pulled our troops out of a Middle Eastern country with the war in Lebanon. He engaged diplomatically with the Soviets and helped bring about the conditions where the Soviet Union could peaceably collapse. And neoconservative hawks at the time were criticizing him in much the same way that Donald Trump was criticized when he was meeting with Vladimir Putin. I guess what can we learn from, I guess, the ways that, I guess, what can we learn from the actual legacy of Ronald Reagan, and what can we learn about how the neoconservatives shaped the narrative in the aftermath?
Boy, you are hitting on the things I like to talk about the most. So, Ronald Reagan, in reality, my biggest problem with him is how much money he spent as a supposed fiscal conservative. I mean, the national debt was nothing like it is now, but it was not good, his spending record. But his greatest legacy was meeting with Russia and nuclear de-escalation. Every neoconservative at that time absolutely hated, and I'm not being hyperbolic, hated Ronald Reagan for being diplomatic and not getting something closer to a hot war with Russia. I know that sounds insane, but that's his actual record. Around 1997, 1998, we're in the Clinton administration. William Crystal, the editor of the Weekly Standard, the premier neoconservative magazine, he was sort of the godfather of American neoconservatism. He and a group called the Project for a New American Century wrote an essay, we go back to our white papers again, towards a neo-Reaganite foreign policy. In that foreign policy, the United States would invade Iraq and we'd stay. And he tried to convince Bill Clinton of this. And Bill Clinton smartly said, nah, that's probably not a good idea. Neo-Reaganite. Reagan wouldn't have done that. When the Marine barracks were bombed in Beirut in 1983 and so many American soldiers died, Reagan immediately withdrew. He later said, we didn't understand the irrationality of Middle East politics. We shouldn't even be there. So that's what Reagan actually did. Bill Crystal was smart enough in the late 90s, recognizing, as you said, Reagan's lasting popularity with the Republican Party, to remold what Reagan stood for into this neoconservative thing that never existed. So 9/11 happens, and, it was Al-Qaeda, who was, not Iraq and Saddam Hussein. And the neoconservatives and their ghoulish, evil minds were like, oh, we can use everyone's fear to get what we wanted a couple years ago now with Iraq. And that's exactly what they did. And they told us throughout, this is what Reagan would do. George W. Bush is like Reagan. Dick Cheney's like Reagan. So they grabbed onto this myth of Reagan and made it neoconservatism. Now, the 2 or 3 libertarians that existed knew that wasn't true, and like Pat Buchanan or somebody like that. But there was no incentive really for anybody to argue with them. They just were allowed to do that. Donald Trump, for good or ill, is going to be a figure that matters on the right long after he's not in political power, in the same way that Reagan was, same way Goldwater was at one time, the same way, different people in political history. So do we as libertarians say, let's take the parts we like and hold this up as, this is America first, and this is what Trump might have done, like meeting with leaders instead of starting wars, with foreign leaders instead of starting wars? Or do we not? Do we say, oh, this is gross, we don't like him, let's, get behind whatever, vanilla Republican comes along nobody cares about? No, I say you do what the neoconservatives did, because they did it to great effect. I respect how they did that. They understood the reality at hand and they manipulated it towards their own ends. You don't lie. We would never lie. But if Trump says Bush lied, there were no WMDs, you say, remember what Donald Trump said? Bush lied, there were no WMDs. And more people will listen to that because Trump said it.
You remember when he said great nations don't fight forever wars?
Exactly.
Remember when he bragged about not starting any new wars, right? Of course.
Right.
Now, I know, and whenever I point these things out, though, I know, certainly on social media, I'll get the, people I love and respect in the liberty movement who I guess have a different perspective on things, but they'll come in and say, well, how dare you call Donald Trump anti-war or suggest he's anti-war when he dropped more bombs in Afghanistan, he dropped more bombs in Syria. And it's like, all those things are true. Those things are true. Those are rightful criticisms of him. But we're trying to, it's not about praising Donald Trump. It's not about trying to, it's about there is his base. And there are some natural libertarian tendencies in his base that we can appeal to, and we can grow kind of the movement in that. And if we can win over huge cross sections of the America First base, then that really opens up possibilities for the future in terms of promoting liberty. And of course, a very prominent figure in the Republican Party now who kind of has come out of nowhere recent years, Vivek Ramaswamy, is talking about doing just that. He's talking about like a nationalist libertarian kind of coalition. And he talks about how kind of the America First message is a little amorphous and undefined. And what happens when Donald Trump is no longer the person carrying that mantle? Who defines what America First becomes? Is it defined by the Ron Paul wing of the Republican Party and the Vivek Ramaswamys, the libertarian folks? Or is it defined by the Tom Cottons and the Lindsey Grahams and the neoconservatives who've managed to stay close enough to Donald Trump and to kind of try to be in a position to co-opt that versus the others who've already fled for the Democratic Party?
Correct. And Vivek gets it in a big way. Here's the question. Do you care more about moving the liberty needle, moving that needle in a liberty direction, or do you care more about Trump? Eric, you and I'm going to speak for you for a second, pompously, I think care more about moving that liberty needle. There are a lot of people out there that care more about Trump more than that hating him or loving him. It could go in either direction. We want to tell people who love Trump, who haven't thought about some of these issues, hey, Trump agrees with us. Here's what he said. Maybe they'll start thinking about it. I think that's more important than whatever Trump. One of the biggest examples I could make of this besides foreign policy. I was watching Fox News with a family member who I love very much a couple of years ago, and the First Step Act had just been signed into law by Trump, the greatest criminal justice reform in ever signed by Donald Trump. And Alice Johnson, who was not part of the First Step Act, but was a face of criminal justice reform during that period. Here's a middle-aged black woman who'd been in jail for years and years because basically she was hanging around a drug dealing boyfriend and got caught up under mandatory minimum sentencing. And anybody that looks at her story or what she was charged with or the whole deal understands that it was totally unjust for her to be in jail for as long as she was. So she was pardoned by Donald Trump. So I'm watching Fox News with my Fox News watching relative, and we're watching this, and she goes, why was that woman ever in jail? This is terrible. I said, well, there's a lot of people with her same situation, nonviolent offenders who under mandatory minimum laws, which Joe Biden, was an author of a lot of that stuff, the 1994 crime bill. This is a situation Trump's trying to fix it, and he's starting with her. And this relative of mine said, well, that's something we got to take care of. That's not right. Now, this person had not even thought about this issue. Criminal justice, what, who? But here it was front and center on the channel they watch. Criminal justice reform, the guy they like, Trump, he's in the middle of it. And not only are they thinking about the issue, but they're thinking about it on the correct side that we would agree with, the libertarian side. Why wouldn't you use that? Oh, I hate Trump. Well, that's nice. You hate Trump. Good job. What are you doing to make things better? Not a damn thing.
Well, and I find that folks who are in that position of just defining themselves for or against this figure, and their beliefs kind of reflect being for or against whatever that person is, right? They're very much in the same boat, right? Like, there's two flavors of TDS, right? There's the Trump derangement syndrome that is often talked about, where people just like irrational hatred of Donald Trump, right? Beyond what is many fair criticisms to make about the man.
Sure.
But then there is the opposite of that, which is the irrational devotion to him.
Right.
To change his mind on something, and your mind changes with him.
Correct.
And as much as easy as it would be to, I guess, make fun of people who are kind of in those situations, I know when I look back at myself at earlier parts of my life, that's exactly where I was.
You're human.
Right. Before I kind of breaking out of these kind of mental prisons of these narratives that are pushed by the mainstream media, right? It took authority figures that I respected to lead me to a place where I could start to ask questions that I didn't allow myself to ask, or to think more thoughtfully on things. It took people like Glenn Beck to say, we can think about the wars,
Yeah. People, look, I was a Young Americans for Liberty event in Arkansas a number of years ago when they were doing the state conferences. And I'm talking to a local Republican leader at the Young Americans for Liberty conference about why it's so important that we elect Tom Cotton to the Senate. Now, Tom Cotton is not in line with Young Americans for Liberty, especially on foreign policy. I didn't look down upon this person telling me this or anything. I understood exactly where they were coming from. They were Republican in the state of Arkansas, and that's who was running for Senate, and they wanted him to win. Now, you or I are like, what? No, like this isn't right. But that's not how people think. And don't be patronizing towards them. Don't think you're better or smarter than them. That is human nature. Look, you've got an entire Democratic Party right now. I'm not being patronizing towards them. The most unpopular vice president in modern history is now God, basically, in a matter of 3 weeks. And why? Because they hate Trump so much. She's the only alternative. By God, she's going to be God. Yeah. We're going to mythologize her in that way. That's human nature. What else are they going to do? That's what people do. The smartest people in the world, do that.
Yeah. Well, Jack, we are running against the end of the hour, so I could always keep talking with you for much longer. There's so much more to talk about and explore, but I'm going to have to give you the last word. Any final thoughts you want to share, and where can people follow you on social media?
You can find me at Base Politics on Substack. You can find me at Jack Hunter 74 on X, formerly known as Twitter. Eric, it's always great to be with you. Had a good time talking today, and I look forward to the next time.
All right. Awesome, Jack. Looking forward to having you back in the Free State. We'll love to have you at PorcFest in June. And also, I don't know if you've heard, we're doing something new with Liberty Forum this year. We are taking papers and we are focusing on how do you achieve liberty for real societies, and we're asking people to identify problems that come about when you're trying to achieve a liberty for real society, and potential solutions for that. We're going to hear great presentations from folks. So Jack, I don't know if there's ever anything you've thought about. How do we get to a liberty for real society, and what's a problem to overcome? If you have any ideas, we're happy to hear from you. But also to anyone out there who would love to, we're taking submissions now for New Hampshire Liberty Forum at nhlibertyforum.com.org. It's one of those two. I can't always remember what's a .com and what's a .org, but folks can check it out. And Jack, I know we'll have you at PorcFest. I'd love to get you back on the main stage there and hear what you have to say next year.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Jack. All right, everyone. That's the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will say one last time to get your tickets for the Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference. That's a lot of words. It's a long title. Some people just call it FSBDAC, but Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference in Durham, New Hampshire, September 1st. And I'll be speaking. Some great speakers will be there. Get your tickets. Register at blockchainnh.com. And I'd love to see you there. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 7. We always have a new episode. And if you have not yet done so, something that would really help spread the reach of the show is on whatever platform you're watching this. We do video casts, and we also, on some of the podcasting channels, we have just straight podcasts where you're just hearing it. But whatever you're listening on, leave a review, like the show, share it. I don't know, whatever makes sense on your platform, however you're consuming this. Like, share, subscribe, retweet, whatever. And it would be appreciated very much. It'll help the show grow. And I guess until then, I will see you next time, next Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Thank you, as always, to our producer, Raynita, who is doing fantastic work keeping the show running. By the way, I will mention Raynita, maybe we should have her on the show sometime, because she's doing great work on a documentary on the Free State Project. It's called the Free State Documentary, and we've been showing clips of it at different events that we've gone to over time. Anyway, fantastic work. I'd love to, maybe that would actually be a very fun show to do, is maybe kind of walk through some clips of that documentary, and she's great at what she does, and she does a great job of making this show look wonderful. So thank you, Raynita. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.